everybody, I'm Ducky and this is another Spookytoberfest update for you, and I'm showing you a pretty much completed horse for the Soulreaver Knights. I think I'm happy with it so far, and I thought I'd show you some actual painting today. I've only shown you results so far, and I thought I haven't in any of my previous videos shown you the technique known as wet blending, and that's how I achieved the blue here on this caparison. The blanket on a horse here is called a caparison. I've left the saddle just a dark color because, as I've said, there's going to be a rider sitting over that. It's going to be covered up. There's not much point to it, painting it. Otherwise, I've painted it mostly bone and blood meats with a few pieces of flesh in a sort of greenish brown hue. I made the hooves a bit lighter or darker. And anyway, to achieve this sort of transition, I'm going to show you on one of the others. I'm using two colors. I'm using periscopes from Panzer Aces and turquoise from Mod Color, both Vallejo paints. And I have one of these special wet blending brushes from Games and Gears. It has a very short haft and has two brushes tips, so that I can switch easily. I'm going to pick up the darker color in one and the lighter in the other. And let's see, I go in like this, and sorry, I have to put on my glasses. Forgot about that. That's a dark color. So we put in some dark color here, and we switch to the light, and we lay that down on the edges, smear it out a bit, and we go back with the dark and smear that out and sort of create a transition here. And we go over this a bit and blend it out. We go back in with the lighter color. And you start to see how it all blends in, and you continue to work at this all the way around. You go back and pick up a little bit more paint, and I'm working on like one small area at a time here, just because I don't have any drying retardant in the paint, so I have to work quickly while it's still wet. And because the paint is on a wet palette, it does stay wet on the palette. It's just as soon as I pick it up in the brush and start laying it down on the miniature, it starts to dry. That's a bit much. Put back some. And this is a method you can't really quantify. You have to just sort of do it by feel, and you have to keep doing it until you feel it's enough. Oh, I put down too much of that there. I have to go in with a bit more of the dark. This needs more light. You see, as it looks a bit rough when you first put it on, but as it dries, it becomes better. Yeah. So I'm gonna go around until I've done the first blend all the way around, and then I'm gonna show you something else. And there. And I should have mentioned, of course, that I put down the base coat of the periscopes just to yeah, to have a base coat at all. Now you might be happy with this. It's a little bit subtle because these edges are actually pretty sharply delineated. So what I wanted to do in this case was to go back in after this first blended dried with just the turquoise and do essentially an edge highlight here, just the very tops, the raised edge here, to emphasize that. Not here in the back. That's too. That's not as sharp. Just to make this pop a little bit more. And I'm using just the edge of the brush here to catch the raised area. And there's very little paint in my brush, so I can do it like a little bit of sort of like an overbrush, a dry brush here to add a little bit just about on the ridge. I did experiment with going in with a third color and a lighter turquoise, the light turquoise, and putting in a secondary wet blend at the top just to make even more, but I don't think it needs it. I like this effect overall. And at the moment I can't see any other real mistakes I need to fix here. I'll watch the video back because that always tells me more than looking at it with the naked eye. But otherwise I'm gonna finish up these and then varnish them. This guy I have painted a slightly different way, mostly with glazes, as I was talking about. I wanted a lighter color for him, or her, it, I don't know. I think I might go back over with a brighter red in the bloody areas in certain, yeah, make that pop a bit more now that I look at it. But again, I'm gonna play back the video first before I decide anything. So after the cut, some hours will have passed and you will see my conclusions. Surprise, I'm already back. No, they're not varnished yet. I just wanted to show you what I realized after watching the video. It looked way too muted. I needed the blood and gore to pop more, as it hopefully does now. We'll have to see when I watch this back. And especially on this guy, looks more bloody. And this is through the application of a very nice product called Tamiya Clear Red. However, I do want to point out one thing and make a rant. Fuck paint pots. Fuck them to hell. Please, manufacturers, stop using this shit. Because I just wasted half my pot because I tipped it over out of clumsiness. And we have this huge stain here on my table. Fortunately, my table is covered by paper and I wiped it up, but still, it's such a waste. And yeah, you can blame me for being clumsy, but guess what? People are clumsy. It happens. And it is annoying as fuck. And it never happens with dropper bottles. These are a genius invention. Why doesn't everybody use them? Oh well. Rant over. Back to your normally scheduled programming. And here they all are, finished and ranked up in a movement tray. So you see they function as units. I should comment on, you might have thought that the wet blending looked a bit messy, that I was just slopping on huge amounts of paint compared to what I normally do. That's partially true, partially an illusion. I mean, it's true that I have more paint in my brush for that technique than I would for a technique like layering, for example. But the paint is not very thick. I mean, the paint that you saw was much thinner than it appeared because it was on my wet palette first and it was thinned down with water. So, I mean, I would not wet blend something like
really thick goopy paint just straight out of the pot. Anyway, let's see what happens if I take out the Lord and run him as a solo unit and simply increase the spacing a little bit. They still look like a unit, don't they? I mean, the important thing is the frontage, and you get that from the movement tray. Anyway, in some ways, you might say this looks better when they're not so crowded. Well, that is the first sub-project of the Spookytoberfest is accomplished. Let's see, look. And by the way, I should note that the idea of being able to pull the miniatures off, it's technically possible to, because I've pinned them. I haven't glued them. They're just sitting on their pins. I noticed while I was test fitting them that putting them on and pulling them off again pulls some paint off the saddle portion and the insides of the legs of the riders. But of course nobody will ever see that because that's on the inside. It's hidden. And well, my paint scheme is, you will note, is inspired by the one on the cover art. It's not identical to it. I think mine is superior in some ways. Of course I would think that. But anyway, let's move on to the next phase models and see how far I've gotten with those.
For Ilona, I've decided on this base, the smaller runestone. I was swayed by... by the way, thank you for everybody who piped up with an opinion. I considered all of them closely. But I was swayed by the argument that the bigger runestone was too big. She would look dwarfed by it and out of place. So I've decided on this one. I also decided that the skull is kind of wasted on a dynamic model like this. The skull would be more appropriate for a model that was standing still and had both feet together and was just like balancing on the top of the skull. That would be more interesting. So I wanted to leap off this side because it's well, it has more of a slope. So I've drilled a hole and I'm, when dry fitting, simply it looks like this. She will look like this from the front and like so from the side. I think that's properly dramatic and interesting. Oops. The actual pin is going to be longer. I'm simply, like I said, this is not, it wasn't even glued in. I'm going to glue a longer pin to her so I can stick her in a cork for painting. So, and of course I'm doing more work on this base, putting some basing grit down and so forth. And that's where I've gotten with her. When it comes to the Pegasus, I have had some issues. Well, I've had to make some creative decisions. See, when I put them together, the two halves, and I disguised the joint a little bit with some black primer here, but the legs actually were too close together, and so I had to bend and twist with some pliers to get them apart a little bit, and then the fit on the base on this the pegs into the holes was a bit wonky. So you can see that I've strengthened this by adding pins on top of the existing pegs, and I don't know if you can tell, but I've drilled holes through here. So stick it in like this, and it will stand more better. I'll both glue it in, and then I'll add some, I don't know, green stuff will hold very well. Maybe I'll try some milliput. You see, here's the imbalance. That when one foot hoof is pushed all the way in, the other one is still a bit off the ground. It's difficult to get both in at the same time without leaning. And now the angle here, I've tried to get the body sort of straight on, but the head will be a bit angled to the side. It's not going to be completely straight. If you look straight upward from the... Yeah, but I thought it would be a little bit dynamic to have it slightly angled. So I'm going to glue this in and continue modeling work on this and make sure the body is properly situated before I add on the wings. And by the way, I am kind of worried about how... Now I've started painting the cloak here, but the cloak fits on like so, and he sits on the horse like... I don't know how he's gonna have to sit sort of leaning forward like this if the cloak isn't gonna be in the way. It's kind of odd. We'll have to see if this changes when the wings come on, if that lifts it up a bit. But I might have to cut the cloak down to size. We'll just have to see. And, well, that's as much as I got done on the Lord for now. And after some time has elapsed, we've gotten this far. Here's Ilona, primed white and with certain areas blacked out. It's an okay skull. The mold lines bother me a little bit still, but you know, I think I've hidden them well enough. For example, if you really look closely on the underside of the hair here, you can see a bad mold line, but who's going to look up there? You know, you're going to look at it from above or the side. So I can live with it. And here we have the Vampire Lord, also primed white. Like I said, I'm painting him without the cloak on because, yeah, it would be kind of a bother to paint with that cloak. And he's, you know, no trouble apart from the cloak, I suspect. Then we get to the horse. Now, this is the milliput, the white stuff, and it's good stuff in that it hardens. It's rock hard. It's not like green stuff, which is always a bit soft, perhaps, which is good for things like strengthening the connection here between the hooves and the base. However, the workability of it is... maybe I've been spoiled by working with putties that are easy to work with, but I'm used to, when working with something like green stuff or Procreate, that it becomes easier to work with if you wet your fingers. And actually, there was an instruction booklet in the Milliput package that said that exact same thing. It told me to even, yes, you can work with Milliput under running tap water. That's a frickin' lie. I tried wetting my fingers and then kneading the Milliput, and it just disintegrated into a slushy mess. You know, it did not take well to water at all. So, okay, so then I tried with completely dry fingers, and that worked a bit better, but then you had the problem that it had almost no tackiness at all. It was very difficult to get it to adhere to anything. So I don't know. I'd be obliged if somebody with more experience with Milliput could chime in and tell me if I'm doing something wrong, or if I just have to live with this, or if, you know, the pros, do you think the pros outweigh the cons? Ah, well. Anyway, I'm gonna continue working on the base here, as well as this base. And by next video, I should have finished the base and attached the wings to the Pegasus. Maybe done some painting on the rider and the other vampire lady. But I think this has gone on long enough by now. This is probably one of my longest videos yet, I think. So, for now, I'm Dakian, and I'm signing off.